Today I'm going to be looking at KeyForge, one of the most exciting things to happen to card games in years.
To play KeyForge, you'll buy a pack like this and it will contain a full, totally playable, but completely unique deck.
Yeah, probably the first time I began thinking about it was, late 90s, like 97, 98. Maybe 4 years ago, I began to suspect that the printing capabilities could actually do what I wanted to do.
Imagine if the creator of Magic the Gathering decided to make another game. Imagine you realized that he accidentally made it racist.
In mass market, KeyForge was fourth behind the big three, that is the Pokemon trading card game Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh!
So yeah, the game's doing great, all is well, and then suddenly they're like, we're taking a break.
KeyForge is being put on hiatus because the algorithm that built the decks broke. We do not know how or why.
I am 99% sure that this is the case, but not 100% sure, so I started just asking questions. I'm like, this seems odd. We got ransomware, didn't we?
KeyForge. Yes, KeyForge. A highly requested game that embodies exactly how difficult it can be to innovate in the TCG space. So much can go wrong when you deviate from the tried and true, but it's those special qualities that KeyForge got right that gave it its beloved legacy it has today. This project required a lot of research, and so we need to give props where it's due. A very special shout out to Zach Armstrong and his work on KeyForge Public Radio and the Call of Discovery podcasts. His research and interviews were extremely helpful, and I encourage you to check them out for an even deeper dive on KeyForge.
I'm constantly unhappy when there's a card which I like, but I realize that I've got to get rid of it because my deck just will work better without it. That's an unpleasant and unfun experience for me, especially when those cards are interesting. And that isn't part of KeyForge. If you've got the card, you're going to play it. It's just a matter of...
You hear that voice? That's the voice of Richard Garfield. He's best known as the inventor of a little game called Magic the Gathering, the very first trading card game in modern day history. But Richard wasn't content to simply rest on his laurels. The man is an inventor who loves to tinker, and this was reflected in his post-Magic output. In a sort of one for me, one for you manner, Garfield got Wizards of the Coast to publish his multiplayer board game Robo Rally, a game he had initially wanted published before working on Magic. This was followed by Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, a game that allowed Garfield to expand on the TCG concept by introducing dedicated multiplayer elements to card games. Netrunner would come next, an interesting concept where two players each represented a different side, and both had decks based off different card pools, making mirror matches impossible. All this to say, Richard was always pushing boundaries and seeing how far a concept could go, and he wasn't about to let the technology of the day stop him. Alright, so he had to wait a few years. But before he knew it, he was bringing his ideas for KeyForge to Fantasy Flight Games, and they were in business. And what a business it would become, reaching some incredible highs before it all came crashing down. But before we talk about how KeyForge brought innovation to card games, we'll go ahead and shout out, not my sponsor, because I don't have one, but we'll shout out Vince Kaichan, who provides the music for this channel. You can listen to and purchase all his music at his Bandcamp, which I'll link in the description below. And of course, if you love learning about the history of different card games and how they're made, as well as how they die, then you can subscribe. Yeah, that would be nice. KeyForge was born when Richard Garfield asked the philosophical question, hey, why y'all using the same cards all the time? The prevalence of net decking, or copying the deck lists of the top performing decks, led to competitive card games like Magic featuring less variety amongst card choices when deck building. As a fan of higher variance amongst games, Richard wondered if he could eliminate the need for deck building entirely. Could he put everybody on a more or less equal playing field when it comes to what deck are you gonna get?
How bad is this deck? I hate this deck. It seems awful. Do you want to try it?
KeyForge doesn't come in booster packs of random cards that you can then assemble into a deck. Instead, you purchase the entire deck, but it isn't predetermined like a precon or a theme deck. Every single deck you buy is randomized by an algorithm to produce a deck entirely unique to you. It's worth noting that all these decks were made out of a predetermined pool of cards. This isn't like Altered or Chaotic, where every card is unique. It was the deck lists themselves that were one of a kind. While some decks were, of course, naturally better than others, you weren't able to just build or copy your own version of that deck. You had to play with what you got, or you purchased one of somebody else's opened decks. And yes, this does mean if you lucked into or bought a very powerful deck, you most likely had a leg up amongst the competition. This naturally positioned the game in the casual to semi-casual category, and was not one meant to be a display of immense skill in drafting, deck building, or metagaming. Although that didn't stop players from having fun at the tournaments that were on offer. Of course, you can't just trust players to stick to the honor system and not take cards out of decks and put them in a different one, not to mention it could easily happen accidentally. So you need to make each card back in a deck unique from any other card back in any other deck. The easiest way to do this? An algorithmically generated name on the back unique to every single deck. I accidentally ordered mine in German, so now we have this. Andromeda, Bauermeisterin der Villa. Andromeda, Chief Construction Lady of the Villa.
Architect.
Architect. Ah, Andromeda, Architect of the Villa. That's a pretty cool name.
I want funny though.
We do want funny. Oh, it's in German, that's a little funny. Welcome to Guess That Deck Name. Which one is the KeyForge deck? Which one is gibberish? First, we have the oddly musky quantum of Fireball, or the terrible taxation of tea in the turquoise tortoise. If you guessed the oddly musky quantum of Fireball, congratulations, you got it. That one's a little easy. What about Mortimer's Call to the Last Supper Time, or Trap Peak the Dirty Shopbender? The correct answer is Trap Peak the Dirty Shopbender. You're good at this, maybe, I don't know. How about another one? Is it The Emperor That Pays for Boys? Oh boy. Yeah, so unpredictable things can happen with algorithms, and that led to some pretty funny deck names. It can also lead to some mistakes. Decks with these less than ideal names for PR purposes were coming to light right at the launch of the first set of the game. This was, of course, a giant accident, and the people behind the game were as horrified as you would imagine they would be, even if the rest of us would have found it quite funny. Despite the good intentions, running a brand new card game is difficult enough without the unintended vulgarity. It's one of the many costs of doing business when you hinge your game off an extremely complicated, unique, and new process, as we'll continue to see. I do believe they managed to round up a lot of the most problematic names before they hit circulation, but there might be some ticking time bombs out there. So if you're looking for a laugh, an unopened deck from the first set, Call of the Archons, could be a fun time. And speaking of Call of the Archons, it really was a bomb dropped in the TCG landscape. After its release in November 2018, KeyForge was listed as the 4th highest selling collectible game behind the big 3 TCGs, according to ICV2.com. Players loved the interesting nature of the game, as being able to rip open a pack and play had never been so easy. Alternative formats, such as intentionally trying to win with the worst decks you could pull, made the game fun in a way no other card game could replicate. The gameplay was unique. This was less of a fight and more of a race. You're trying to forge 3 keys before your opponent does in order to win. KeyForge, get it? And Yu-Gi-Oh! Players love this one trick. There's no resource system. Every deck comes with 3 different houses. Before your turn, you declare a house name, and on that turn, you can only play cards from that house. Every turn was a strategy call on which house was best to play for the most optimized turn depending on your hand. This led to an element of randomization while still maintaining player agency. And yes, tournaments were held in the form of the Vault Tour, events where anywhere from 100 to 300 players could come and compete. But in the spirit of the game's less competitive nature, most tournament prizes capped out at room and travel expense coverage for future events, and were more likely to include KeyForge-themed merchandise than anything super extravagant. Players were really getting into it, registering their decks online in what was called the Master Vault, allowing everyone to see what decks existed. The buzz was only getting louder as the game closed on its first year. However, the good times didn't last forever, or we wouldn't be here asking, what happened? Once again, we are shown how important the follow-up act is for maintaining momentum. Age of Ascension was the sophomore set for the fledgling game, and players were let down by the low power level of the cards. Sales took a tumble, and the game never appeared on the ICV2.com bestseller list ever again after the fall of 2019. KeyForge had the element of surprise for its first release, but once that's gone, you need to go the extra mile to keep your fan base interested. Your next set should have strong play design, interesting mechanics, so that players don't feel like they're playing with simply rejected cards from the first set, as many lamented here. The next 3 sets were received more positively, well, almost, but no amount of good sets could fight the world-stopping events of March 2020, as communities of all card games had to stay inside, away from their local game stores where they could come together and spend their sweet, sweet cash. Card games like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Magic, they could capitalize on this time because collectability for them is just as important as playability, and they had elements of nostalgia behind it to take advantage of this new wave of interested consumers. It's the same reason why sports cards shot up in value at the same time, the nostalgia factor and the collectability. But a new game like KeyForge that focuses heavily on gameplay and community is going to struggle. But that same community was like, nah, you ain't dying today. The players, those that remained after the second set flop, went to great lengths to keep the game alive, if not physically, then through digital means.
If you do buy a deck, there's probably going to be like a little growing KeyForge meta somewhere in your city you can go to.
Online tournaments were started by organizations such as The Crucible Online, the Sanctimonious Community, and Arkan's Corner, amongst many other leagues. Having a client like The Crucible Online, where players can play the game in their browser, was and still is imperative in keeping the game alive, and a testament to the dedication of the fan base. KeyForge wasn't at its peak, but it wasn't out of the game yet. See, Fantasy Flight, they said so themselves, see? Down but not out. In reality, this is the pivotal moment in the game's history where Fantasy Flight revealed that the game was going on hiatus, citing pandemic troubles, but also a mysterious, unforeseen complication, which was, the algorithm broke, which meant that KeyForge had lost the ability to make randomly generated decks, which was kind of its whole deal. Yeah, so the game that boasted that it could generate 104 septillion different deck combinations saw that number dwindle all the way down to 0. And I cannot imagine how heartbreaking it would be to lose the backbone of your business and all of the hard work that went with it. To be honest with you, the fact that this isn't the end of the KeyForge story is a miracle in and of itself. And that's right, even after a catastrophe such as this, KeyForge is still breathing. On life support, but breathing. But before getting to today's efforts to keep the game alive, fans have wondered for years as to the source of the algorithm break. It's not so crazy when you think about it. I mean, a proprietary software just breaking isn't something that anybody in the world can simply fix. But fans still wanted to know, what happened? I did my due diligence and emailed the current owners of the game, Ghost Galaxy, in hopes that they would be willing to shed some light on the issue, but did not receive a reply. Which is fine. I mean, who am I? Just some rando on the internet. I don't even know if they can legally talk about it or anything, so this isn't shade to them. So I went with, from what I can tell, is the most accurate piece of information on it we have online, courtesy of Zach Armstrong at Call of Discovery, who interviewed an employee who worked worked at Fantasy Flight Games at the time of the break. The employee made sure to disclose that this was his best guess as to what happened and not the definitive answer, and that his experience may be different from others who worked at the company at the time, and to keep that in mind. But you should just go listen to the interview in its entirety anyway, because honestly, it's really good. To summarize, he found out that they most likely suffered a ransomware attack. Hilariously, he was accidentally told this by an IT guy after poking around. This might imply a sense of shame upper management felt about the event, since they hadn't divulged any information about what happened to their staff at all. Since ransomware is often acquired by clicking on suspicious links, perhaps someone who got fooled and brought down the ecosystem of the entire game was simply too embarrassed to own up to it. But that's my own personal speculation. This is not definitive by any means. If it was ransomware, there are certainly other ways to get infected that's not just clicking on suspicious links, and it's honestly just really sad for all the victims here. Not only for all the artists and designers and everybody involved in the company who worked so hard to bring this project to life, but for all the fans whose beloved game was now shut in limbo. In June of 2022, it was rescued from purgatory by Ghost Galaxy, a games publisher founded by Christian T. Peterson, former founder of Fantasy Flight Games. So it's safe to say he was quite familiar with KeyForge. They rebuilt the algorithm on their own, dubbing the new and improved software ForgeFire, which is a badass name no matter how you look at it, in order to sort of test the waters for how consumers would respond to the revitalization of KeyForge. Ghost Galaxy went a game found for their first set in the reboot Winds of Exchange. The crowdfunding campaign was a success, with over $1 million raised by over 6,000 backers. I don't want to understate at all just how ambitious it was to create a game like KeyForge. Adding unique elements is going to drastically inflate the production demands in all areas of a game, as written about in a wonderful article by Christian Peterson on Fantasy Flight's website. And while the idiosyncrasies of KeyForge surely made the production more convoluted, sometimes it's the simple things that are the ones that get us. Like shipping. As we've seen from other recent crowdfunding attempts by TCGs, KeyForge experienced delays in fulfilling their pledge promises to backers outside of North America, with some backers not receiving their packages even as the second set was announced. And while North America did represent most of the market, meaning most backers weren't affected, it did also imply most of the interest was concentrated in one region. That's not ideal for global growth. Winds of Exchange did see a retail release, but the following set, Grim Reminders, also started on GameFound instead of going straight to retail. I find GameFound and Kickstarter campaigns to be a wonderful way to get your game off the ground when it's new. But for maintaining player interest, personally, I'm dubious at the effectiveness. I think there's a sort of player fatigue that can occur when players are expected to keep a game alive through pre-orders, and judging by the results, I might not be wrong. I'm not sure what the results would have been if they went straight to retail with the second set, but in the end, Grim Reminders raised roughly half of what the first set raised, meeting the backing goal, but with declining interest. They then did GameFound with the third set, and the fourth set, and the fifth set, which, hey, the number's going back up. If they're getting the numbers that they need to keep the game alive, then hey, more power to them. Maybe they know what they're doing. What do I know? But I can't imagine that KeyForge can stay alive simply through pre-orders when so much of the community that I speak to doesn't even know that KeyForge still exists. When I asked my local game store if they carry it, they told me that KeyForge was too old to carry, so I'm not even sure they're aware it's still going. Be that as it may, the 11th set, Shattered Reality, was announced through a stretch goal on the last GameFound, and its own campaign is expected to launch sometime in 2026. And being honest with you guys, I'd love to see the game continue. It's so unique, so refreshing, and to see a game forge ahead through the fire despite all of the logistical hurdles it has to face is inspiring. And I'm not here to tell you how to spend your money at all. I personally would feel apprehensive about supporting a game that relies on constant crowdfunding efforts in order to stay alive. I do think the self-contained, sealed nature of it, though, lends itself to a little more flexibility on this part. It's not like a TCG that relies on power creep through other cards in order to stay active. If you have any interest in KeyForge at all, maybe pick up a couple of decks, play with some friends, and see where it takes you. You never know, maybe you'll be able to say that one day you helped save a great game. Or you'll own a relic of the past. I don't know. Everything is ethereal. We're all just floating on a rock through the vast emptiness of space and time. And that's what happened and what's happening to KeyForge. Thank you for watching. There are a lot of games that have died in TCG history and games that are still going. I would love to cover them all. If you have a favorite game that you would like me to cover, go ahead and let me know in the comments. And if you have personal experience with KeyForge and felt like something could use more attention than what I covered, or would like to share your own experience, also please let me know in the comments. All right, Vince, take me away.